The worst experience, migraines. I almost felt like I just couldn't breathe. So I was highly
Jesus.
medicated for over 3.5 months. Nobody could figure out what it was. And I
You were
finally took
sick that whole time?
3 months.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more. All to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. And our guest today is Tabitha, who is better known as Little. And she is a host of a very successful podcast titled Little Bit of Life. And within the Little Bit of Life universe, we'll call it, she has a newly launched monthly true crime podcast called Within the Shadows. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I know, I think I said when we scheduled this that I'm going to reverse the script and now you're going to be on the receiving end of some questions.
I know.
So
It's so odd to be in the other seat and to have just passing over control. It's definitely something different, but here goes nothing.
here we are.
Yes.
Do you do a lot of podcasts? Other ones?
I do so many. I started the podcast. It just turned 2 in April. It was something as a fluke.
Happy birthday.
I know it's been huge. But I have over 172 episodes in 2 years.
That's crazy.
Hmm.
Congratulations. And
Thanks.
before you became a successful two-time podcast host, my favorite question I ask everyone is, what did you want to be when you were growing up? How'd that change? And what led you into the world of podcasting 2 years ago?
So I think that's where the nickname comes as Little. I was always very small growing up in school. I was always that kid that was bullied, picked last, especially
Mm.
remember in dodgeball, third grade. It was like, you can have her. No, you have her. And I just remember always being tiny and always being called little. And that kind of just stayed through high school, stayed through college. And it was just something everyone would laugh. They're like, oh, here comes little. Oh, she's so little. And it stuck. And so growing up being tiny, all the girls wanted to be ballerinas or vets. And it's everyone laughs. I wanted to be a horse jockey growing up. That was my dream. Hmm.
That is a first. And not only is that a first, that is like the most detailed thing that I've heard of like a little like what? How did you even know what that was? And then why'd you want to do that?
I don't know. I just remember watching the Kentucky Derby growing up, and I remember seeing all these horse jockeys, and I'm like, wow, like they're so amazing and they're so famous and they're bonding with these animals and they're doing all the hard work and they're little, they're small, they are tiny. And it was something
Ah,
like even growing up, I'm like, I could do that. So it was interesting, even in like junior high, people are like, oh, I want to be a vet. And here I was like a
right.
small little child, like, I want to be a horse jockey. Like it was just the most odd thing ever. And then I eventually grew to 5'3", and that passion kind of went out the window.
So wait, you're 5'3"?
Hmm.
So this is the weird thing about the internet. For some reason, and I have no reason to think this, I thought you were like probably 5'7", 8,
Hmm.
9, 10. I thought you were tall.
I
Why?
know.
What's going on in here that made me assume you were tall? But that's,
Everybody says that. I'll meet
oh,
people in
really?
person or like in airports. They're like, oh, I listen to your podcast or I see you on social media. And they're like, I thought you were tall. I'm like, 5'3" is like on a good day. That's a very good day. More like 5'2", but I like to stretch a little bit.
Hey, you can round up to the nearest
Right.
whatever. I'm 6'5", and when I wear certain shoes, I can be like 6'6", but it's very like I don't know that I'm so tall until I see myself in pictures. Like I'm just so, you know
Hmm.
what I mean? I'm like so used to it. And then I see a picture, I'm like, I'm a freaking giant.
Hmm.
I'm a
Hmm.
giant
Yep.
man. My one former coworker said, "Well, you're kind of tall, but you're not really a giant. You're more like a mini giant." So I'll take that.
I'm just mini. That's all.
Yeah.
There's no giant after. I'm just mini. But yeah, people always say that. I thought you were taller. I'm like, no, hence the name Little. And I've always gone by that. So when I created the podcast, I knew I wanted to embrace everything. And so I was like, we're just going to call it Little Bit of Life because there's nothing that's off limits, especially over there.
That's good. That's good. So how did
Mhm.
you, up until you decided to podcast, what was your, your journey to get there? Because you obviously decided you were too tall at 5'3", we'll say, too tall to be a horse jockey.
Right. I was born and raised in a very well rounded family. I had a great upbringing, very close to both my parents. My grandparents were married 67 years. And I just loved seeing that sense of commitment. My mom worked for the police department. My dad was a police officer, veteran, blue line family. So I was always
Mm.
very structured. I'm an only child, and especially growing up, I'm like, well, the horse jockey is kind of out of the equation. So let's grow up a little bit. And so I went into the medical field. I wanted to help other people. I'm definitely an empath. It's kind of been a good thing and a bad thing in life.
I say
But I
that all
joined
the
the
time
medical
in
field.
life.
Ugh, sometimes it's so hard. You just carry everybody's burdens, even if you try not to.
Yep,
So
exactly.
I worked in the medical field, loved it, was great at my job. 2020 came around, and that was the year that changed a lot of people's lives. I actually got COVID before they knew what it was
Mm.
and was
When did
very
you get it?
sick.
Like,
January of 2020.
okay.
hmm So I remember everyone kind of in my building started to get very ill. And it was something where I had never had headaches before, migraines before. And it was almost like that movie Outbreak. I had
Totally.
the worst experience. Migraines, I almost felt like I just couldn't breathe. So I was highly
Jesus.
medicated for over 3.5 months. Nobody could figure out what it was. And I
And you were
finally took
sick that whole time?
3 months.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like long COVID,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oh my
Yep.
gosh.
So severely sick. No one knew what it was. I kept stating, oh, you have pneumonia or you have upper respiratory or you just have this or you have that. And so they were kind of checking everything off the list. Working in medical, I knew something was not right.
Yeah.
Months and months later, it started to get severe. I had to see a neurologist, got into the Mayo Clinic, truly blessed to be able to get in there super quickly. And it turned into COVID, long haul COVID, which I still have, and it just deteriorated my immune system. So I have a cardiac issue, I have a neurological condition, and it sparked an autoimmune of lupus just this past April.
I saw that on your website. I meant to ask you that, but I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to invade. But
Mm-hmm.
what the fuck? How did
Yeah.
do you sorry for the language. I did not know this. What did
Yeah.
you like so that when did they figure out it was COVID?
So I kept knowing that something had almost like invaded my system. And working in the medical field, you kind of get used to people doing their own Google MD and doctoring, and they do all of the things. But I knew that something was not right. And I kept persisting and advocating for myself. It got to the point in May of that year, I had migraines so bad, I was going blind in either one or the other eye. I had short term memory loss. I was found wandering my neighborhood, just walking my dog, not knowing where I lived, what my name was. So I was very successful, loved my job, was great at it. And I had to go into a full battle with my HR department. They were absolutely terrible, fought me hook, line, and sinker. And it was something where
Were
I
you on
just
like
felt,
a paid leave or were you trying
mm-hmm,
to work through it? Okay, because I can't imagine
mm-hmm.
you trying to work through in your field with this type of injury.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was something where I continued to advocate for myself. I was at home and it really affected my mental health. I was so good at my
Right.
job and proud of what I did. And that's where the podcast came up because I had a great friend of mine. She's like, just go on social media. So when TikTok came out, we were all kind of stuck. And at that time, I thought it was helping my mental health, but I really don't think it was. I think it kind of set the parameters of my expectations of how I wanted people to view me versus who I really was at the time, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
So what
So
were
I,
those views that you wanted people to view you?
I wanted to be healthy. No one knew for 2 years on social media, nothing. I wanted to appear healthy. I wanted to appear, I had my life together. I wanted to be a role model for any other people. And I was almost embarrassed by my medical condition. I always thought
Oh.
that there was something wrong with me. I was super successful. Um, and I met a
Did you
great group
blame
of
your mental
people.
health on that too? Like your mental health
hmm
struggles? Oh, that's so unfair.
But I
Yeah.
grew up in kind of that atmosphere with my family of, mental health is mental health. You don't talk about your struggles. Just
Mm.
figure it out, deal with it. Don't complain to other people. Everyone, there's always somebody that has it worse than you do, and just keep going. And I kind of festered all that, I would say, until probably at least last year.
My gosh, so you really internalize that.
Hmm.
I think what's so scary about like people, I don't know, exactly how old you are, but I assume we're close enough in age that we can relate to this feeling of what you just said, where like you didn't talk about your mental health struggles, and in fact you would hide them. And as someone who is an expert at hiding my struggles, what the way you're talking about this is totally relatable. And it's funny because, I myself, and I may have even said this to you in our last interview, like when I withdraw from social media, I'm struggling like completely. Like you won't see me post for sometimes weeks at a time because I don't want to put out there like the struggle. It's real. I shouldn't say I don't want to. It's really hard for me to put out there the struggle. So that's like our generation for some reason was forced to just say, keep it inside, don't share it with the world, and
Hmm.
move forward. Or as
Yeah.
I grew up Catholic, trust God has a plan for you. Cool, thanks.
If that plan could show up now versus never, that would be great. I'm
Right,
the most impatient, stubborn person you'll ever meet, for sure.
right. So you
Hmm.
decided to start this podcast, and your goal was to, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So what was your goal with it?
To disappear. That's the only easy way at that time that I could explain it. I had a great friend of mine. She lived in Florida and she listened to podcasts, and I was very open and relatable on social media. But I almost felt like I was seeking approval from others versus myself. So as soon as a 15-second clip went up, I could be anything I wanted to be. And people saw that. But then I realized it was interesting. I was editing myself. I was rewriting a narrative based on a 15 to 30-second clip. So people would meet me, they're like, oh, you're amazing. I want to be you. You have everything together. And meanwhile, like they didn't see behind the scenes that after that clip took 15, 20 tries, I was blind in one eye. I had no memory of what I was editing, typing. So censorship started to be huge on social media. And I'm one of those people, if I have
Which we've
something
talked
to
about.
say, yeah, if
Yeah,
I have something to say, like I want to be able to express that because I
me
think,
too.
like you and I have talked about, it's not a sense of an argument. We're all communicating. And the more open you are with your struggles, somebody is going to connect with you somewhere. It's bound to
Yes.
happen. And so I stopped social media for a while, started a podcast, did the research, and my first episode reached 270,000 listeners. And
Wow.
that, I don't know. And that was my moment of like, oh God, I have to keep doing this. Like it was just to like kind of branch off.
Yeah.
And it has been nonstop ever since for 2 years. And now it's not disappearing. I'm actually discovering myself in every single episode, which is so cool.
That's the best part. And I think that's one of the reasons I've realized I do this too, because you got to work really, really hard for a long time to make any money off of podcasting. And to be
Hmm.
successful with it takes consistency. It takes grit, I would say, especially when you're kind of working on your own to get guests and to edit and place and all that stuff. It's time consuming. But what I think is really cool about that 2 years ago when you started was you were obviously reaching people in a
Hmm.
very relatable, meaningful way. If you're getting that much reach on a first episode without
Hmm.
a predetermined platform, right? Without any type of, and I mean, maybe you did a little bit on TikTok, I don't know, but like you didn't have like this big investment injected into your podcasting career
Hmm.
or platform or advertising or anything.
No, I just literally, I mean, now I do consulting. So I help people start their own because I think we live in a world where we feel like I have to plan this out for years. I have to save money for years. I have to come out straight out the gate and just have absolute perfection.
Yeah.
And I tell everybody, I'm still learning. I'm 2 years down the road. And I always say, don't put yourself in a box. I've said that with podcasting, but I also say it now with my mental health. Just because I might be feeling good today doesn't mean tomorrow is going to be a good day. But nothing triggered, nothing shifted, nothing caused that. It's just how our brains are constantly on overdrive and how we process. And being busy and having OCD at its finest, I have to have something to do. I have to have a task. And
Hmm.
the podcast has brought people in my life that I never would have even dreamed of. But it's amazing to see in mental health, you can connect with somebody in the rarest form possible, even by not being vulnerable and telling your story. You don't have to come out and have this grandiose, story and sit down for hours and tell all of your problems to somebody, but you'll simply connect by communicating versus arguing with people. I think that's our
Yeah,
problem now in society.
I totally agree with you. And I'd love to actually expand on that a little bit. Right now, I would say when it comes to mental health, we're doing a lot of education. We're talking about it more. I think, again, like our generation and maybe lower generations to come are going to be more open. We're trying to heal generational trauma to not pass it down, all of that fun stuff that we get to talk about. But I
Mhm.
think with some of the stuff I've noticed recently, and it is mostly online, or at least that's where the debate seems to happen, is because therapy speak is so um, common now because people are more aware. There's so much negativity that starts to come from this removing this stigma online,
Mhm.
and the nature of being on social media or Reddit or online is that people can argue without looking a person in the eye. People can say something without having to understand that they're speaking to a human being, which I know, I've talked a lot about this online and online bullying and stuff. But I think now there's instances where therapy speak kind of gets weaponized in a sense. And it's almost having the opposite impact because now we have random, faceless, nameless people on the internet throwing out all sorts of diagnoses without any expertise, which, by the way, I think even a mental health professional would say, I can't diagnose someone online that's not my patient. Like, that's unethical and I wouldn't be able to do it effectively. So I don't know if you see
Mhm.
any of that, but I remember where I really started to notice it was with Jonah Hill's texts getting leaked, like I think it was last
Mhm.
summer maybe. And I remember like reading those and listening to people debate about it. And I'm like, what the hell is he even talking about? Like,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
so yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that made me think of that when you were talking and just the way it's thrown around online and people are just fighting with each other.
Yeah, I think it's become now judge and jury of society. And you have to defend yourself. I
Mm,
feel like you're always on the witness stand. I've seen this with social media. I've seen it with, even in your situation, with reality TV. Like I've had you on numerous times now, and many other guests as well, that it's not reality. Everything now in life is a form of entertainment, but when you're looking at your audience, like who's really watching you on social media, which is when you look at that is terrifying. And that's why I love doing podcasts because I have guests on. I mean, the motto is what we seem to think but don't say. I mean, I,
hmm
I touch on a lot of topics, but there's always one key. It's mental health. Whether you're having a great experience and a great story, you can go from, I mean, I interviewed Audrey Hepburn's son. So, I mean, so many people sit there and think you interviewed Audrey Hepburn's son, but yet you had, like, for instance, you from, a reality
Yep.
show. What's the difference? We're all human beings. And I think that's what we miss is that I can connect the dots between any situation and myself. Because again, it's judge and jury, but are we listening or are we hearing somebody? There's a massive difference.
And are we listening to be responsive or are we hearing and reacting? Right. I think
Mm-hmm.
so many people want to react and they get triggered by something and then they just want to like spew their trauma all over the place and the internet makes it much easier to do that. So I think you're spot on with that. And um, what I really like that you said, and I feel the same way, is like we're human beings first. And that's why I don't want to box myself with my podcast either. I'll talk to anyone who I think has something interesting to say or an interesting story, whether I agree with them or not, right? Back to the censorship thing. Like, let's have a debate on the merits of the idea and not name call or project our own issues on people. But when you think about like, and also by the way, you know what I just told someone this 2 nights ago at dinner. I'm like, fuck your critics. It's your podcast. You can talk about whatever you want. Like, don't let someone else who's able to leave a comment or able to leave a review or
Mm-hmm.
send you a DM. Like, don't let them tell you how to do your show. It's your show. You can have on
Mm-hmm.
anybody you want and talk about anything that you want. And I know you know
Mm-hmm.
that, but it's funny that we have to deal with that. But the human element of it, I think, and one of the things I like about every time I've talked with you is that there is that human connection despite the fact that like we have different experiences and you had a different guest about a different topic, or now you do true crime podcasting, which I want to touch on too as well. It's like we want to label people, whether it's right left, right wrong, mentally this, narcissist, whatever it is. We just want to label people so that we can just continue down this path of dehumanizing people. And I think that's what I'm seeing it do with just labels and online bullying and the way that
Mm-hmm.
people that go on reality shows are treated and all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I saw a quote. It was interesting. I don't remember where it was. So I think it was somebody actually, shockingly, I think it was on TikTok Live. And it was interesting because popped in and you can do like guest boxes and stuff. And we were just talking about how social media has changed our generation. And we brought up a really interesting point, which goes for everything, whether it's listening to a podcast or watching somebody on a social media platform, watching the television. As human beings, we were not meant to meet as many people as we are now, interact with as many people, and have to maintain as many relationships as we do. And
Hmm.
when we sat and thought about that, I'm like, wow. And then we wonder why mental health is such an issue because it does go with social media. My grandparents' generation, you saw people at the store, you maintained and built relationships face to face.
Yeah.
Now we're maintaining relationships, one with ourselves. Two, I mean, we all have an alter ego because when we do this for a living, you still have to remain professional, have a sense of entertainment, have a sense of draw that people are
Yeah.
interested to hear what you have to say. And then we're also maintaining relationships with complete strangers. I mean, think about how many followers you have that are expecting something from you, whether it's weekly,
Hmm.
daily, hourly, depending on your platform. As human beings, we were never meant to have this much interaction with other humans at one time.
That is so true. And while you were saying that, it made me think not only do we have social media, we have text messaging, we have phone calls, we have Zoom, we have, I'm not giving them a free advertisement, the platforms that we advertise or record our podcasts on. And then
Mm-hmm.
what it does is it creates this sense of urgency about so many things. And I didn't even think about that until you were saying that. But like, when I think about how many text messages I have to respond to, even my words, I don't have to respond to
Mm-hmm.
any text messages if I don't want to, right? And then on top of that, you add TikTok, and then on top of that, you add Instagram and LinkedIn or Facebook or Threads or X Twitter or whatever team Slack, whatever you do for your job. And then on top of all of that, you've got like the face-to-face relationships that you really want to nurture and you really should be focused on, but it's such a gosh, you're right. It's just so stressful. And I actually have my notifications on Instagram turned off. I turned them
I do
off
too.
well over a year ago, and it is like, whoo, what a relief to only go in there on my time. But then I do still get that sense of urgency when there's like so many unread DMs or something, and I'm like, oh my god, I gotta get out of here. I don't respond to
Mm-hmm.
any of them. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's so interesting. I've never thought of it being so many people because usually back in the hunter and gatherer days, right, and even later, you didn't have that connectivity. You were with your tribe, or you were with your family, or you were with you would keep the same job for, most of your career. And now we're constantly meeting more people, constantly having more channels for communication. It creates like a sense of urgency. And one thing that I've noticed, and I've been, when I work with people, like my teams, I try to tell them, like, just because something is the number one thing on someone else's priority doesn't mean that it needs to be the number one thing on your priority. And what's top of mind for someone else doesn't need to become top of mind for you, even though they have access to you now in a way where they can communicate with you directly in the moment that they want it. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
something good for everyone to remember. Like, you can actually make the determination of what you have space for and what you can handle at any given moment.
Yeah, I didn't even learn that in therapy. I mean, I talk about mental health so much on my podcast and just in real life. And, lately people are like, did you learn that in therapy? And I'm like, no, I actually stopped going to therapy because I'm finding new avenues that I can break the mold of my patterns and the system that I thought was functioning, but it's not. And it's interesting because you used a word in there to prioritize. It's who you're prioritizing.
Hmm.
Social media and mental health they coincided so quickly with me. But that also like bled out into my friendships, my relationships. I mean, I found myself, even with social media, especially with podcasting and doing all of the things, I was prioritizing social aspects of my life that were behind a screen versus
Hmm.
the face to face interaction. I mean, I remember dating
Well, and
somebody,
during
which
COVID too, like it
you
almost you were
had to.
forced to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember dating somebody, which he was like, I don't have social media. Now in the dating world, if somebody says I don't have social media, I either A, I'm like, "Ugh, where have you been my whole life? Or B, I'm like, that's a huge red flag. What's really wrong with you? What are you hiding? Because of what I do.
Hmm.
But I remember sitting at dinner and I remember it was something where he's like, oh, someone recognized you. Somebody has to take a picture with you. And here we are in a small town in Kansas. I'm like, oh, this is awkward. And I didn't know how to handle that. But then I remember sitting at dinner and I would see those notifications come up and I found myself grabbing my phone and he's like, I'm here. This is important.
Yes.
But I was
Yeah.
using it to disappear and escape because I felt the prioritizing need that those people came first, that I didn't know how to interact with anyone face to face.
I completely agree with you. And I think that was something that when Love is Blind first came out, that was something that I think every one of us probably struggled with on the cast. But I was immediately like, I don't know what to do, right? I wasn't even active on social media before that. And it just became this thing where it was like, oh, I've got to respond to the comments. I've got to keep my engagement. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And it kind of got to the point where now I don't really give a fuck at all about responding to the comments unless I feel like I want to. I'd much rather go, like I said, on my time. But I do think that during COVID, especially during COVID and before, but really during COVID, we all kind of probably went through this thing where we became so reliant on our phone for the missing connections that we weren't having in real life, especially if you were single or if you were furloughed and you had lost your or fired or whatever, laid off, you had lost your structure and social connection and stuff. And now I look at now Gen Z's calling out Gen Alpha for being socially awkward, which is like, man, look in the mirror before before you do that. No offense to Gen Z out
Hmm.
there, but it just like it created these really big challenges for us to connect in real life versus connecting over like digital platforms. Do you think that played a role for you, or
100%.
yeah?
Yeah. I think it was also this almost crack in our system where the entertainment industry came in and honestly took advantage because even dating, I mean, I do a lot of collaborations. I was just asked to join. It's so wild. I said no because I was like, boundaries and
Yeah.
prioritizing. That's first in mental health. It was like, this is our new form of dating. It's dating through a video chat. And I'm like, if there's not enough that's missing in the dating world from reality TV, structure, dating apps, everything is just so readily accessible. I'm like, this is why, again, we are not building and maintaining face to face relationships because everything is so accessible on the go. And
Hmm.
I think that the entertainment world came in, and that's where reality TV really saw a spike. I mean, even with your show that's coming out every 6 months, when you think of the work and the casting and the screening and everything that goes into that every
Hmm.
6 months, because they know that people, it's almost an addiction. Social media has become an addiction.
Yes.
And I feel that there's now this shift where we are talking about mental health, but that shift is so important that it's a lifelong journey and process. So, how are you prioritizing your time and how are you maintaining relationships with others, but with yourself? I think it's interesting. When you said you shut off like your Instagram, like notifications, do you get that anxiety sometimes of like, I wonder what my number is? I wonder how this played out?
I did for a while, but ever since I got shadow banned, which I know I complained about extensively to you, I'm kind of like I already know it's just going to be not worth the juice I'm getting isn't going to be worth the squeeze of what I put into it. So I actually don't. And sometimes I just post and ghost on TikTok in general,
Mm,
because I quickly understood from, a marketing perspective, which is my profession and all this stuff, how that algorithm was addictive. And I didn't want to get in that during TikTok because all of a sudden I didn't know what TikTok was. COVID hit, like you said, everyone kept sending me TikToks all the time. Like, what the hell is this thing? And and I was like, I'm not getting involved in this. Like, I just made the conscious effort. I'm like, I'm not getting myself involved in this. But it took some time to get back to your question, especially with Instagram. It took some time. Um, Now I don't really think that much about it. I don't. I don't post unless I really have something to say. And
mhm,
I do find myself like doom scrolling a lot lately because at the end of the day, like I have a lot going on in my days, and they're pretty packed most days until like later at night. And at that point, I just want to dumb myself down and not think. And that seems to be like my drug of choice, which I don't like. So I'm even before we got on this call, I'm like, I might delete the app for a little bit and just break these habits. But what about you? What was it like for you? Especially, actually, before we do that, that could be the end. But I wanted to ask you, when you were sort of putting this life for yourself on the internet, that, correct me if I'm wrong, but
mhm.
almost felt like that was the life you wanted to live, and therefore the life that you were putting out there for others to see, even if it wasn't your reality. And how did you get yourself out of that mindset to where you are now, where you don't go on, notification dopamine hits, and you're not getting those, which will throw you off completely, as you know?
Mhm.
How'd you get there?
I think it was really hard because it was something where I had to admit that I had a problem. I think with social media, we don't see that as an addiction. We just see it as fun. It passes
100%.
the time. It's entertaining. It's checking us out from reality. And I realized that I was living in more of a fantasy land on social media than I was my actual real life. Um, I joined TikTok. I met some amazing people. It was kind of strange. When I first joined TikTok, I was set up with someone, like almost this like reality online dating experience. And it's so
Wait,
funny
when
because
was that?
this was right in 2020. This is
Oh
when
my
like
gosh.
TikTok
Okay.
first came out. That was like my experience with TikTok. So I had an individual, his friends had like done this application process for like a date. And I remember I was like, oh my gosh. There was like multiple people chosen. Oh my goodness. If my mom listens to this, she'll be like, are you serious? But I flew to Louisiana for a New Year's weekend, not meeting this person, not knowing this person. And I remember he had a very large following on TikTok. And so getting off at the airport, like getting off the plane, walking through security, he was live on the social media platform. Hundreds of thousands of people were watching our first interaction with each other. And in that moment, I thought that was normal. I was like, this is great. People are watching. And I remember like my best friend at the time, she's like,
Is this
I
still
can
a
see
thing?
people are doing this now constantly, which is really scary. Because now I'm like true crime. I'm like, man, I could have done a true crime on myself. I can never imagine doing this ever again. But I remember like my best friend at the time texting me, and she lived back in Arizona, and she's like, you're not feeling it. I can see your face. And I remember texting her, I said, hundreds of thousands of people are watching, and I cannot let them down in this moment. So it was weird. Like I had no
Whoa.
feeling, no connection with, and he had a bunch of friends there. Everyone in the airport is watching. Everyone's cheering us on. Hundreds of thousands of people are in my DMs on social media. How's your weekend? What are you doing? Asking to have us go live and document this entire weekend. And it was this weird feeling because as soon as the live shut off, I was like, this is reality. Like I'm really with a
Right?
stranger for days on end. No one's watching. And that was my reality wake up point of like, how do I really feel? I'm not put on this planet to entertain people. So what am I actually doing to live in reality? And now like I'll have people are like, I want to meet you in real life. I'm like, it's gonna be a no. It's gonna be a
That's
hard
a
pass. It's a
That
no.
is such a crazy experience, and to do it live,
Mm-hmm.
like, and to disassociate that way, because I do think that's so relatable, like on the reality TV thing, because there's a moment where you kind of start to disassociate with it, and it can be healthy or unhealthy depending on how you approach it. And that's one of the things I actually guide people that I talk to, where I'm like, you have to disassociate who you are as a human from what you experience there and what you see on TV, because
Mhm.
it's not a reflection accurately of who you are. But like, you were at this point and this streaming whatever, this live, and this whole experience, and did you find yourself just like being in this character that you had created for yourself? And
Mhm.
then, oh wow.
And this character he created because he had never met me. So he was going off of a couple of FaceTimes, text messaging, which is so different when you meet someone face to face.
Totally.
And so we would have to keep up this narrative. So the entire weekend, everyone knew I was there and where are you going and what are you doing? And it was this tour guide experience. So everyone's like, oh, you went on vacation. I'm like, no, I was literally followed by numerous people going live with cell phones, showing every bit of our life. I mean, we were at a restaurant. People were like, oh, they're here. We were being tracked and traced on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. And I remember we went out for maybe 30, 40 minutes and he's like, people know that you're here. So smile for the camera. You're here. This is entertaining. We're going to get more followers. And I remember flying home and I'm like, I'm done. This is the weirdest experience. I want out of whatever this bubble is. And the
Mm-hmm.
hatred from people that didn't get what they expected to receive, that's when it all switched. So when I did my podcast now, no comments are allowed. You can listen, you can share, but humans are, like I said, we're not made to be entertained. We're not circus performers, and we're not meant to interact with that many human beings at a time. And
Yeah.
that really affected my mental health for sure.
Wow. So what was that transition like for you? And by the way, I think I've shared this with you. If not, I'll share it now for others. But this is how I feel about reality TV. I feel like it's the gladiator games, which or a circus, which Rome created as the empire was collapsing to entertain the poor, desperate people while they were expanding militarily and letting outsiders into the military to do it. And they just turned the people against each other, right? And they did it in the town
Mm-hmm.
square with circuses, and then they did it at the gladiator games, where before you know it, your fellow human being, you're rooting for getting destroyed by a tiger or a lion or some crazy scenario. So it is very similar. And when that experience happened to you, like, I would imagine it was a big eye opener. And then on top of that, what was your mental health like? All the criticism and stuff, but that obviously plays a part, but like almost this realization that like I've been doing this wrong.
Mm-hmm. I went from, I think, around 1,500 followers on TikTok to now 37,000 very fast. They're still there. So a lot of people started to be intrigued by the person behind the live, the person behind the camera. And it was very scary because it was that, again, where is my reality? Who am I? You don't get to know
Hmm.
somebody in a 15 to 30-second clip. And so I had to reinvent myself because I started that whole live and that experience on a platform. And so I was like, okay, is this the rest of my script? Is this who I'm going to be known as? And I
Hmm.
saw a lot of friends that are very big creators on that app lose their life because of those comments because they got lost in the character role
Oh.
and they didn't know how to get out of that. And so I truly think this podcast has really shown me of what life is supposed to be. There's real life out there. There's so many stories and you can connect with people. And now I literally use social media platforms as that way to connect and find stories because I learn something new about myself every single episode,
Hmm.
but I'm learning too that there has to be that mental health and that disconnect. You don't carry other people's stories with you.
Right.
And I would say that's the hardest part with social media because I'll ask friends of mine, like, what is your screen time? Did it go down? Did it go up? And it's interesting because as we struggle and learn who we are on a day to day, week to week basis, that's going to fluctuate, which in return is mental health. Personally, I have too much anxiety. I'll admit it. Can I delete the apps? Absolutely not. Because
Hmm.
I know who I am. I would just go back on and download them anyway. But I always tell people it is an addiction. So what is it giving
Totally.
you that you're missing in reality?
Yeah. Well, and that's why I think with COVID, it gave you that missing human connection that ultimately was probably needed at the time, but long term, you look back on it and you maybe would have approached it differently with hindsight, which is always at least 2020, if not better. I think I find this I comparing this to dating, right? Like, which we chatted a little bit about ahead of time. But the whole, like, what apps have done to dating, I think is very similar, where it has kind of taken, and listen, I've never been someone who really like goes up and talks to some, a girl at a bar or in the grocery store or in the coffee shop. Like, I would be too self-conscious or not in the right mindset or something like that. In most cases, shy. I'm shy, believe it or not, about that kind of stuff. But I think what the apps did is it kind of democratized dating to people like that, or people like me in that case, beforehand. And at the time, it's like, great, I can like talk to people that I probably never would have talked to or never would have met before. But then, as that over the last decade or so has sort of evolved, it's created a very similar style of issues within the dating world. And now, like, I can't imagine ever being on a dating app again. In fact, I won't be on a dating app again, I don't think. Um, and part of that is because I can't even imagine what they're like. I haven't been on one in like over 3 years. I can't imagine what they're like. But on top of that, it's like, obviously I've got, some people would recognize me. That's awkward too. But I just feel like it's gotten to this place where you've basically taking the humanity out of those too, with the way people ghost people or talk to so many people or date so many people. And as we were saying earlier, I think before we were recording, it gives you this like endless opportunity type of feel, so that everything becomes a deal breaker, or you don't take time to get to know someone and really connect with them because you've got endless opportunities and everything's digital and there's no accountability to understand or remember or be reminded that you're dealing with a human being.
Yeah, everything is fast tracked.
Yeah.
Everything. I mean, even when you stream a show, oh, you can have this for just a couple extra bucks. It's not that much, but you miss the advertisements. That's what they want. Everything is fast tracked. And I feel like dating has become that way. And even in relationships, I always wonder what social media has done to relationships, because are we building or are we breaking down those relationships? I mean, even little things like we talked about before we were recording. Are we communicating or is it an argument? Everything in life now has to be, you're arguing with me, this is a red flag and I'm out. Versus,
Hmm.
even my grandparents' generation, if you had an issue, you talked about it, which is communicating. And that goes with everything. But it's also, how are we communicating? Are we doing it in a healthy way? Because I don't think with social media, we know how to have healthy conversations anymore.
No, we don't. And you're allowed to, behind the guise of it, be cruel or be short or whatever that is. I think you're right. I think that's actually a really good point. Like, so the role social media has played in all of this too. It also doesn't help, at least it doesn't help me. And I find myself a little juvenile about some what I'm about to say, but like I I just feel like so many people share the highlight reels of their relationships or their life, and they can glamorize anything. And you can glamorize being a single person, you can glamorize being married, you can glamorize being in a relationship, but very rarely does that accurately represent any relationship, I would say, friendship, family, partner, whatever that is. But people just, you go on it, and this is where I get juvenile. I'm like, I'm so sick of seeing how happy these people are in their relationships. And like, it kind of, even though I know better, there's this piece of me that's like, well, I want something like that, and then it kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
and you internalize it a little bit, even though you know better.
But that's part of that crack. That's what they want, is because we show the good. We kind of got into that flow and that system of show the good, because look at what's happening everywhere else. Show the good. Well, then when you see that, you're like, oh, I want that. So I'm going to go find it on this platform, or I'm going to go on a dating app, or we're always behind our phones. And it's something that, even with, I had a conversation just the other day with one of my friends that's a new mom. She's like, we're judged all the time based on what our content looks like. And I always tell people, take a 1 week, it has to be 7 days, take a break,
Hmm.
disappear. You have to do a post. So again, that responsible part of you is like, not like I'm just leaving. But I always talk to even big creators and I'm like, what do you owe people? And they're like, well, I'm like, because you've already
Hmm.
started off in the wrong mental health space. What do you owe people? Because if you're in a healthy kind of repertoire of what your schedule is and you don't see that as an addictive aspect, your answer to that is I don't owe anything to anyone. I owe it to myself first. So are you
Yes,
doing
thank you
it
for
for
saying
the right reasons?
that. I mean, I couldn't have said that better myself. That's so well said. And I think that when you're a creator, which I tried to take the advice of people who were telling me what to do to be, quote, a creator, and it wasn't the content. Like I never post anything, out of my character or anything like that. But it was like not appealing to me and not serving me to like post stuff for other people. And what is appealing to me, and again, I went through this, what is appealing to me is like posting stuff that makes me feel like I'm being heard or I'm sharing something important or sharing my perspective on something or, a lot of times a meme or something that, makes sense for people to see from my perspective. So I do agree with that. And that's a good point with the creators. I think there's a little bit of like people pleasing in there as well that shows rears its ugly head in these situations. But what would you say, when would you say like the light clicked? Because now you're coaching people, you're helping people get started. You're going to have you are already, I'm sure, having a lot of conversations with people that are going to take that creator from social and it's going to become creator for podcasting. When did it click for you on how to handle this and how do you convey that more so to others?
I think it was when I was scrolling on social platforms and there was this giant shift of COVID is over and now we're being forced out of our homes. We're being forced to have those hard conversations in person. How do we do that? I saw a lot of friends of mine that were creators with millions of followers, and they were like, I don't know how to get back out there. And I'm like, we don't know how to be human beings without a phone. And I'm like, wow. And so doing the research and talking to people and really being transparent and vulnerable on social media, I would always ask, what is your biggest dream that you know is so beyond unreachable right now, no matter what it
Hmm.
is? And everyone kind of was all over the place, but they were like, I want to do this and that. And I said, what is stopping you from trying? And it was always this fear of what are other people going to think.
Yeah,
It was never this internal, like, I don't have the money or I don't have the smarts or the brains or I can't do technology, nothing like that. And so I started coaching people to do a podcast. And I always tell people it doesn't matter the number of listeners you have. It doesn't matter the topics you want to talk about. There's always going to be one person that's going to love what you do, and there will always be one person that judges you for what you do. It just depends on, it's like a swing set. Are you going to go on
hmm,
that side or are you going to swing on this side? You ultimately have the choice. And it's been the best jump off I've ever done. I mean, I do topics that are I'm scared to death to do,
I bet.
but I learn something all the time. I mean, I will do wrongful convictions. I do a lot of, domestic violence. I will do happy and sad. But it's something where I tell people, you never know until you try something. Are you doing the approval so that you'll be proud of yourself? Or are you waiting on the world to give you that sense of satisfaction and that affirmation you can do something? Because if you wait that long, you're never going to do it.
You'll never do it. And you got to have sort of this recollection, I guess, with yourself. And this is, I had to recently do this because I almost quit my podcast at the beginning of the year. I felt like I wasn't getting the reach, the shadow banning, the censorship. It's a lot of pressure to do some of the things that I talk about, but I feel at the same time like I have a duty to do it. But what I really realized, and I know I talked about this on your show, is that I'm actually doing this for me, and where more so than I'm doing it for other people, and that's why I'm not able to give it up because I enjoy talking like this. I enjoy having real conversations. I hope people find value or something helpful that comes out of it. And that to me is me giving a way that I like to give back to the world to try and leave it in a place better than I found it, which is so, I've really realized even with all the reality TV work is I just feel this innate need to like contribute to society and leave things better than I found them. And, as you've said, when you have something to say, speak up. Like that's something that I've had to learn to do more of, but now it's, part of my ethos and who I am. But I think it's hard for people to really get to that point. And the way you break it down there is so simplistic and like easy to understand that anyone can understand it and anyone can use that as a launching point to start looking inward and find out what's your why. and it should be about you, not about other people. And other people
And
will find
it's
value in that.
it's your safe house. I mean, I can
Mm,
tell when you and I do, like, even here or when you came on mine, it's a sense of comfort. Our homes are should be our sense of comfort. Our four walls are our comfort. So when you find something you're passionate about and you're not censored and you're not watched and you're not critiqued, because those all go into it,
yeah,
make your social platform, if that's maybe where you feel most comfortable and you're happy and you get good mental health feedback for yourself, not for other people, but for yourself.
yeah,
Make that your home, make that your comfort space. If you have a podcast, make it comfortable. You're not here to please the world, because no one ever on their deathbed says, I wish I would have worked harder at that. I wish I would have done this differently. I wish I would have listened to this comment. Or, like, for me, it was the hardest thing. I'm like, I am talking about very sensitive, hard subjects. It's
yeah, you are.
things that people don't want to talk about. So I already knew jumping out of, am I going to get really negative feedback? Yes. Is that going to make me feel passionate about what I'm doing? No. So how do I stop it before it starts? No comments allowed. And I didn't feel guilty. I think that's also
Shouldn't
true.
feel guilty.
Protecting yourself, saying no, turning those notifications off, and being passionate about what you're doing. That the first probably 6 to 7 months of my podcast, I did what everybody wanted. I did the podcast topics. I allowed the comments. I did what the listeners wanted. And I saw a roller coaster. People connected and didn't connect because I wasn't being true to myself.
Yeah. You were
And as soon as
you
I
were
was
chasing
selfish,
others.
I did it for me. And now it's out of control.
Well, I think the cool thing about you finding that in yourself, which is again a superpower, because so many people, even if one of those things, if you know it, it's the application is not easy. And I'll be the first to say, like, I know how I should behave on a lot of things and think about a lot of things, but it's much harder to put it in practice. But with your show specifically, I think what's so interesting, um, as part of that is like your kind of journey into almost some taboo subjects that may be difficult for some people, or off brand of you a year or two ago. And by the way, like, one thing I say, on brand, off brand, I hate that unless you're a business. Like, we're human beings. I say I'm a human being, not a fucking brand. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you probably feel the same way now. So all the nuance that comes with being a human being, all the nuance with being yourself and doing that in social media or publicly or in your intimate friendships and relationships and everything else. My question to you there is, that is probably what fueled you to not just continue to grow your podcast. And I think it was cool that you told me, you get to like pick your guests and be um, more people want to come on your show, all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've started Within the Shadows as part of I call it a universe. I don't know what you call it, like a network, platform, whatever. And you recently started a true crime podcast, which some people, may not exactly like. And then, of course, you'll attract new people. So what was your motivation to start that element of your content? And then, how does that play into who you are as a person and what you're trying to put out in the world?
True crime is something I've always been interested in. Anyone that comes into my lovely home and looks at my Netflix list, they're gonna be like, "Are you okay?" It's true crime and Dateline and mystery, and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good. This is what I like
My
to watch."
bookshelves like that.
I know. I started taking a lot of emails. I opened up my email for guests, and there were so many that came on true crime and unsolved cases. And for once, I was like, this interests me. And I
Hmm.
started, my mental health really took a dive because I started taking all these serious topics and all these really hard conversations that I didn't learn how to leave it in my office. I would take it out into the real world. I would start going out with friends or family, and everyone would be like, "Oh yeah, today, like, my boss said this." And I sat there thinking, I just talked about the most disturbing, negative topic you could imagine. And now I feel guilty sitting here talking to friends because I don't know how to socialize. And I wasn't disconnecting personal and professional.
Well, that's the empath
So
in you too.
that will never go away.
Yeah.
And so I started the true crime because I was like, once a month, I want to focus on something. I have a co host with me. we would be on every social platform talking about this and that and texting and sending this. And I was like, you know what? Let's do something for fun. She does a podcast that's very much mental health awareness, the hard topics. And I'm like, I want to do something that I'm passionate about. And it was amazing because the outburst of people that were like, I never connected with anything prior because your topics scared me because I had to look inward and I didn't want
Yeah,
to. I can listen to this and I have a voice and I have an opinion. So, like I said, never put yourself in a box with anything. And that was something I wanted to try.
I love that. And I actually want to say that to everyone, like never put your box with everything. That's part of being human. People laugh at me because I say this word so much, but the nuance of being human is what cannot be replicated in some sort of, brand, some sort of influencer, some sort of narrative, whether it be reality TV show or even, a true crime documentary, show, whatever that is. The nuance of being human being cannot be duplicated by AI. It cannot be duplicated. So embracing your whole self, the good and the bad, and the recognizing where you can improve and recognizing where you can find more ways to share yourself with the world. As you said earlier, it's always going to come back to that one person that hates you, but it's always going to bring that other person that appreciates you and appreciates your work. But the authenticity is what's key. And that means that you're having a nuanced conversation on your podcast. And I think that's much more relatable to most people than it would be if you came on and every week you talked about, specifically your mental health journey or whatever that is,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Yeah.
great. And then I want to ask you before I give everyone a chance to ask me a question at the end, but you've asked me so many questions. I don't know if you have another one, but
Mm-hmm.
the other thing I kind of wanted to ask you about, because we've chatted about this offline a couple times now, but censorship. There is a gigantic um, movement, let's just say, for lack of a better word, about censorship. And censorship is coming in several types of forms, from our social media platforms to our government to the news sources we consume. We're all kind of boxed on social and put in echo chambers and all of this stuff. And then you have a platform like TikTok, which is now, and I'm sure Instagram does the same thing, now not allowing certain words to be said or certain words to be typed. So we have like a whole new um, impact on the language that we use to talk about what's deemed a controversial subject or what's deemed, not real, not fact checked, which whatever, I do a whole podcast with you on that probably. But all of this stuff is leading us into this, well, 1984, which I have back here, dystopian type of experience. And as someone now who's been censored, essentially for what I would say is whistleblowing and for having maybe some non-mainstream questions about narratives and stuff, I've also experienced censorship when I was a journalist in high school, not in high school, but I was in high school and college, but censorship in college where I would self-censor and the school tried to, force me. Like, I think this is the biggest issue facing our society, but our country that is supposed to constitutionally have a free press and freedom of speech that is now not really true. And that when you have a bad idea or an idea that someone doesn't agree with, you're supposed to combat that with a better idea and then debate the ideas on the merits of the arguments and not on the labels that have been placed on one another. So I don't know if you've experienced censorship. You're doing some controversial topics now on your podcast and probably some social media too. Have you experienced that? Do you have any thoughts on it that you would like to share?
100% censorship is always going to be there. I feel like it's going to get worse and worse as we go on. TikTok is huge. I just even went live a couple days ago and I was just hanging out and I talked about how June is also Mental Health Awareness Month for men. I was
Mm-hmm.
banned. My entire live went down for harassment and bullying. And
Of
so
of
it
you
showed.
or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I literally just said mental health is very important. It's something that we're in this huge movement that men are speaking up and speaking out. And it's not that you're weak or you're broken. Men and women have feelings. We were all born with a brain and a heart. And so we're able to connect those two. And yeah, I was banned. And I see censorship even, especially with my topics. I mean, when Ghislaine Maxwell was going through her entire court proceedings, I had on a Jeffrey Epstein victim from the 90s. That was so censored. I had not even 50 listens on all streaming platforms. I wasn't able to put certain hashtags, her story. I even did a part 1 and a part 2 because I'm like, I want to test
Wow.
this with part 1 and see how it is stopped. I do a lot of things with the military, wrongful convictions. So it's amazing to me. It's that censorship goes again in kind of handholding with entertainment. If I put an episode out about dating and sex and things such as that,
Pop
it
culture.
it's popping off. I mean, it's amazing to me. And then I do something about mental health awareness and a male victim for June, and it's gone. So I even have censorship even with branding. I work with a lot of companies, and it's interesting because on those really hard episodes, I say, "Hey, I have an opening for an advertisement." Complete silence, or no, we don't
Yep.
want to be placed with that. And it's amazing to me because I'm like, we're
I
all
get that
human
all the
beings.
time. I get that all
Do
the
you?
time. Yeah.
It's amazing. I'm like, what are we
It's
so
been like
afraid
that.
of?
It's been like that with brands too, ever since I started speaking out about reality TV and starting my organization. It's crazy. You become like
Mhm.
a pariah. But you know what I think it is? My theory of the case, like for example, I'll throw Manscaped, who sponsors every single podcast that a man's ever been on. That was one that ended up not being feasible, and it was like I mean, I'm speculating, so this is my thoughts on what happened, was that they actually have a lot of sponsorships with people that are in the system, and by, coming on with me, they could be jeopardizing their brand
Mhm.
abilities there. And that's not the only one that I feel like that has happened with, which is crazy because you think about like you're doing hard work and a lot of times that other people don't want to do or they don't want to do in the long form platform that you're giving it. And I do think there's an element of some of these things like I know I struggle. I'm into everything, like everything news, but I struggle when it gets to like the Epstein stuff because it's like it's so big and it's so crazy and it's like too much for
Mhm.
for me mentally and as an fellow empath. So I would imagine that there's going to be a natural drop off, and I see it when I have very serious topics too, a natural drop off. But that's 50 listeners. Like, there's no way that you could ever have an episode that had 50 listeners at your level.
And then when I went and did part 2, I didn't do all the hashtags. I did no association whatsoever, and we popped back up over 500,000. So it shows what I mean. I do. I mean, everyone laughs. I'm like, I play with censorship because I always
Mhm.
tell people I don't like social media because, like you said, we see the good. I'm not an influencer. I'm not a creator, and I'm not a brand. I'm a human being that has something to say. So I always tell people if you have something to say, even if I don't agree with it, because I'll have topics I don't like, I don't agree
Mhm.
with it. But I see that as an education process of, man, this could open my brain up to something I have no idea and lead me somewhere
Yes.
else. And I think that's what we need to get back to of even if though you see something is great and wonderful on the internet, what are you learning from that? What are you
Yeah.
taking from that? While you're scrolling, you're always taking something from it.
You're absolutely right. I think that's a great note to kind of end on. But I would love to give you the opportunity if you have a question that you want to ask me that you haven't already asked in our hours of
Mm-hmm.
conversations that we've been having the last year or so.
What is your biggest regret in starting a podcast? Because when you started it, you were in the depths of everything and being out there everywhere probably you didn't want to be. And then you started the UCAN Foundation. So you were in the depths of the depths. So what has been your biggest downfall?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. I would say I think I have a couple regrets that are pretty big about it. One is I felt like I waited just a little too long to start it. So I actually ended up launching it in the precipice of a public divorce that had a lot of people having a complete misrepresentation of me. And it was literally like maybe a week after TMZ, leaked my divorce. And I had already recorded several episodes of it for the launch so that I had a backfill of episodes to get me started. And what I think that did was that kind of, plus, I wasn't going to sit around and do what a lot of people do and start a podcast to talk about other reality cast members. So that wasn't going to be my thing. And I think what ended up happening there was where if I hadn't been in the public, if I had been more in the public how I was pre that time, like right as the show came out and, everybody had, more genuine um, interest in following me and my relationship, I think that podcast would have probably launched a little bit better. But I think the people that, had a lot of people that started hating me for things that I didn't do, but I also had a lot of, I lost a lot of followers, which I don't really care. But when you're launching a podcast, partially because of that, that matters. And then I think when people tuned in and saw the content, it didn't match with their necessarily match with their current view of me, or maybe um, the types of topics they expected, being a reality cast member. So I think like the launch there, I wish I would have been able to launch it a little sooner, to sort of set the tone instead of kind of competing against these new ideas people had about me that would potentially listen to it. The other thing that I wish and I think this happens with time. It sounds like you went through the same thing. I kind of didn't get into my groove for longer than I wish I would have. And I fought myself with the production company that I had working with me, were telling me, the data shows these are the episodes that do well. These are the types of conversations you should be having. And it's like, I like having those conversations, but I also want to talk about politics. And I also want to talk about, whatever else was top of mind. Right. And that was kind of like a battle that we had for a little too long. And I finally said to them, kind of like, guys, I don't really care. I'm not doing this for that. I really want to do this because there's things that I think are important to talk about. And that was kind of where I wish I would have, not listened as much, not looked at so much of the data. And then third thing that I wish I didn't have, which I still fight with, is imposter syndrome. I mean, my show does well, but it isn't on the top of any podcast list other than maybe
Mhm.
some individuals. So I kind of wish that, I didn't have as much imposter syndrome, especially out of the gate of inviting, guests on or people that I think would be good. Because that's kind of, I'm sure you dealt with it. Maybe you still deal with it too, where it's like, oh, that person is, 5 million followers. They're not going to come on this. Or, I had Jill Stein as a presidential candidate on a couple weeks ago. And like, I talk about it all the time because I'm so proud that I actually grew up and asked, because I would have
Mhm.
never, that's something that I would have been like afraid to say hi to her in real life if I ever met her. So it's things like that, right? And I just saw freaking Trump went on Logan Paul's podcast today. So I'm like, if he's going on that guy's podcast, no, I'm kidding. But I mean, he's
Mhm.
really on it. But yeah, so I think just those three things are kind of the things that I think about. But I'm also focused on kind of releasing some of that and just recognizing that, like, it doesn't matter if I talk to someone who has 200 followers. It doesn't matter if I talk to someone who has 200,000 followers or 2 million followers. If this person has a story to tell or is an expert in something that I'm interested in, the worst that they can do is say no.
Yeah. I always ask that question, especially those that have a podcast, because I consult people on how to start them, but I also help people that are in that depth of, I'm stuck. I don't know what to talk about. I don't know where to go. I thought this was a good idea. Because I always tell people, and that's why I asked, you launched whatever your idea was into the public, not into perfection. So in that
Ooh.
moment, your life was not perfection and you still launched something in the public. That shows you that you're passionate about it. You're not living in fear. So for anybody that even says like, "Hey, I'm going through a divorce, or I'm going through an adoption process, or I'm going through a loss, or I'm going through grief," everything can be launched in public. It doesn't have to be perfection, especially when it comes to social media. I live in imposter syndrome all the time. I sit and listen. I never listened to podcasts before I started mine, and I'll scroll and think, that was the most ordinary topic. And why did you have hundreds or millions of people that listen? And I'm doing the hard work. And then I sit there and
Right.
think, you know what? I'm pushing this to the public. I'm not pushing this to perfection. Am I proud of it? That's all that matters.
That's exactly right. That's a good point. I'm taking that with you. There's a lot of one-liners in here you should like try to trademark and throw on a shirt or something. I think people would benefit from that. But no, that's a great piece of advice because, and again, it comes back to like, are you doing it for you? Are you putting in the work? Are you proud of it? And I think that's the thing. And I know I'm proud of my show, and you obviously are and should be of yours as well. And the most important thing to remember is you help one person. Like to me, it's worth it.
All that matters. That's why we're here. We're meant to
Exactly.
connect with a smaller version than what we are. So, I mean, I'll have veterans or even people that come up and say thank you, and I'm like, for, and they're like, for just being yourself, and I'm like, my job is done. It's for the public. It's
That's
not for
it.
perfection. I did what I'm supposed to do.
Love that. And where can people find you for your podcast coaching, are you calling it?
Mm-hmm.
And on your socials.
Um, you can stream anywhere: Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, Audible, iHeartRadio. Also on YouTube. I just started that a couple months ago. I feel like people want to watch and they want to be part of the interview. I think that's important for bonding and creating that connection. My Instagram is fantastic, and my TikTok, they're the same. It's just little cute one AZ. I did move to Texas, but I just can't get rid of Arizona quite yet. It's kind of a little imposter syndrome, but too. But I'm very open. I have my DMs open, especially because I love feedback, positive and negative, because I'm always learning. Again, the public's there for a reason. Imposter syndrome is real. We are our worst critics, and so I'm learning as I go. Some may be great, some may be not. But at the end of the day, I enjoyed what I'm doing because tomorrow may not be here. And if I had fun, that's all that matters.
That's outstanding. And I appreciate you taking the time today. I'm grateful for you sharing. I had no idea about the COVID stuff. And are you doing, I should have asked this earlier, but are you feeling better? Are you doing better? Do you have some things under control or
I'm
is,
learning as I go. Working in medical, I stopped all pharmaceuticals. I think that's a total topic. I've done a lot.
could do an episode
whole
on
whole topic. But again, pharmaceutical made me a zombie. Mental health was my utmost importance, and I'm learning to listen, to take breaks. I'm actually taking this summer off. No one's going to miss out. I just put pedal to the metal and did it all within 2 weeks, but there's still going to be an episode launching every other Tuesday all the way through the summer. But again, it's mental health. It's learning to listen to yourself, not feeling guilty, and taking the breaks. So summer is usually my trigger. So we'll just see what the summer brings. Maybe good, maybe bad, but we'll see.
it's going to be super exciting to hear about this. And maybe we'll have to catch up and find out about your summer of freedom at some point down the line. But thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it. And all of those links, by the way, are down in the show notes. So give a follow, reach out, and then, of course, subscribe to the podcast. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks for having me.